Corey Lewandowski, what a coincidence. Hey, he's a best-selling author. 2 books, Let Trump Be Trump, Times bestseller list, then an even better book, Trump's Enemies. You got to check that out, Trump's Enemies Now. You can buy it on B. Dalton Bookstore. You can go to Amazon. I just got one for my wife, Anne the Fräulein. Corey signed it. She's reading it now. She says, wow, this is such a great book. She's pumped. Got to get it. Or you can go to my website, johnfredericksradio.com, and there's a little ad there. Corey's book, Dave Bossy. Click on it. You buy it, takes you right to the link. We make it easy for you. Corey, big night tonight. The president making his first address to the Oval Office. This is something that you've been calling for, Corey, for a year and a half.
Look, John, it's a big night for the president tonight. I think the American people deserve the president to speak directly to them. He can educate them of what is really going on down on the southern border. We saw last week when the president did a press conference and he brought out the members of the Border Patrol who said, we need a wall. These are the men and women who serve every day on the front lines, making sure that when we're sleeping at night, they're protecting our country, and they're asking for help. They're asking for support from Washington, and they're saying, Mr. President, please deliver on your campaign promise. So tonight, from the Oval Office, something that's long overdue, the president is going to address the nation. I believe this is when the president is at his very, very best, going directly to the American people and bypassing the fake news.
And just talking directly to the American people, there's no CNN there. There's no questions getting shouted out. There's no nonsense. He just has a conversation, not behind a podium, not behind a bunch of microphones, just the president talking to the American people. And look, Corey, we were at a briefing yesterday. There was only about 20 of us there. They invited in the top Trump TV and media surrogates. And it was a great meeting we had, and I was there. It was the president, Jared Kushner, Vice President Pence, Secretary Nielsen, the head of Border Patrol, the head of OMB, the acting head of OMB was there. All of this talk about the White House in despair and this black cloud running over it. Look, we were there an hour, and the president was in a great mood. He was laughing. He was joking. And Vice President Pence was very focused on what was at hand. Secretary Nielsen said, look, I've got a job to do. The Congress is not appropriating me the money I need to do my job. I mean, that's what she said. So all this fake news about this doom and gloom, I didn't see any of it. Corey.
You know, John, it's the same narrative that they've been now saying for almost 2 years. 2 years this month of the Trump administration. It's chaos. He's not reading the briefing pages. You know, it's the Wild West in there. We saw this narrative under Reince Priebus, and then John Kelly came in, supposed to have renewed that. Excuse me. Stop that chaos. And now, look, Mick Mulvaney is there as the acting chief of staff. There's no chaos in the White House. I had the privilege of being there and having lunch with the president for a couple hours just a couple weeks ago, right before the holiday season. It was anything but chaos. People are working. They're doing their job. They're trying to open up the government again. They're trying to make sure that the government is functioning properly, a smaller, more efficient, more effective government. And so, look, that's the narrative that the media wants to perpetuate, because when the economy is going great and we have a stronger military than we've ever had and our men and women in uniform have the resources that they need to be successful, they don't want to talk about that. They don't want to talk about the fact that this president is renegotiating bad trade deals, that he has put 600,000 manufacturing jobs back to work in the United States, that more people are working today than ever in the history of our country. They don't want to talk about that because it doesn't fit their narrative. They want to talk about supposed doom and gloom. But the truth is, and the media will tell you this, when they go in there, there is no doom and gloom. They have, as you know, John, as a member of the press, somewhat free range to walk around. They can go see Sarah Huckabee Sanders and Bill Shine and the communications team, and they can walk through there. And they know that's not what the real story is, but it doesn't fit their narrative, so they continue to say those things.
I mean, that is the epitome of fake news, because when you're there and you see it for yourself like I did yesterday, and you juxtapose that, Corey, to the fake news stories coming out, I mean, it's almost laughable. It's all made up. What do you look for the president to say tonight? This is a big night for him, his first really address directly talking to the American people. If you were advising the president now, what would the speech look like?
Look, I think the president has to remind Americans just how important the border crisis really is. There have been 52 or 53 times over the last what is now 43 or 44 years since Jimmy Carter in 1974, where presidents have declared states of emergency for different reasons, many of which are still in effect today. That being said, I don't see how the American people could say that individuals coming across our border who are killing Americans is not an issue of national security and an issue that rises to the level of the president declaring a national emergency. Whether it's police officer Singh in the northern part of California, or it's the fire chief's son in Tennessee, who was killed right before the holidays by an illegal immigrant, we have to do something. Not just that, John. When you think about it, and look, I've heard the arguments from the other side. Well, illegals don't commit crimes at a greater rate than Americans do. Respectively, they don't kill more people, they don't rob more people. Well, but here's the problem. Our country's borders are so porous, and I'll take this bet with anybody from Jake Tapper to, Rachel Maddow. If you tell me within 1 million people how many illegals are in this country, and you're accurate, I'll give you a year's salary, because you can't do it. We don't know if there's 2 million illegals or 10 million illegals. Think about that, John.
Or 20 million.
Or 20 million. My home state of New Hampshire has 1 million people in it. Can you imagine just for a second if we couldn't count those people? We don't even know how many people live in the state. And that's the crisis. That's truly the crisis of where we are. The infrastructure problems that we're faced with. We don't know from services perspective. Go down to the southern part of Texas and see the strain on the services from people who are coming across the border illegally, whether that's first responders or hospitals or whatever that may be. As a country, we don't even know how many people are here. And we're supposed to do that. We're supposed to be able to respond and report back of how many people are in the country so that we can accordingly tax people and accordingly build out. We don't know within 10 million, within 5 million people, John,
we have
nobody can tell us. And the left doesn't want to answer that. They can't. I have challenged every left-wing advocate in the country to tell me within 5 million. John, that's a pretty wide number. Within 5 million people, how many illegals are in this country? We don't know. It could be 2, it could be 11, it could be 20. That is a significant problem. And until we do something by stopping the flow of illegals coming in, then we have a continued problem. Now, the argument will be, well, many people come here legally and overstay their visas. That's absolutely true. But we know who those people are because we're tracking them coming in. And then we would track if they didn't leave. Now, that could give us the number of how many are overstaying their visas, but we don't know who's coming in from the southern border. And what we have seen time and time again, whether it's Kate Steinle or it's officers saying, these individuals who are coming across our southern border have been deported on multiple occasions. They come back in and they commit heinous crimes against Americans, and there was not one word of outrage from the left for Officer Singh's widow or his son. Not one elected official from California raised the issue. They didn't tweet about it. They didn't offer condolences. I thought it was disgusting. As a former police officer, John, when one is killed in the line of duty, everybody feels that. And
right.
When that particular one was so outrageous, it should have been avoided. It could have been avoided. And if you listen to the sheriff of that county, he said this was absolutely avoidable if they would have enforced laws.
Well, in her home state, Nancy Pelosi didn't even send out a tweet, didn't send out a Facebook post, nothing.
And that's
sad.
That's the hypocrisy of the left.
Unbelievable hypocrisy. They don't really look. All it is about politics for them. And the president saying yesterday, Corey, in the briefing, that there's a crisis at the southern border, and simply the Democrats were not willing to negotiate. He went so far as to dispatch Vice President Pence on Sunday, Corey, to meet with staff, Democrat staff. I mean, when have you ever seen that in your life where a vice president sits down and meets with staff?
Never. And this goes to show how important this issue is to the president. It wasn't just the vice president. It was the vice president. It was Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, a very close, trusted advisor to the president, and Kirstjen Nielsen. They made their way to Capitol Hill. They didn't meet with Nancy Pelosi or Chuck Schumer. They met with their staff. And what we heard was they raised technical issues to the president. And the president's team, under now the leadership of Acting Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney, was out at Camp David. The president went out there on Sunday, and he said, I want the government open. Find a way to make this happen. We have to make sure we're running efficiently, but we're not going to do it when Americans are dying from people coming across the border. And I don't understand, John, look, I love my country. My grandfather served it in the military. My father did. My brother did. We love this country. I don't understand the argument from the left that says we don't need to protect our borders, that we are a sovereign nation, but anybody should be allowed in. I literally don't understand it. I've been around the world. You go to Israel, you see the walls that they have. And I've said this so many times, John, can you imagine just deciding on your own, you're going to go to another country and you're going to walk across the border with complete impunity? Can you imagine what would happen if you did that in any other country in the world? They'd immediately put you in jail. We've seen it. Whether you're a journalist or not, whether you have press credentials, it doesn't matter because there are rules. We're the greatest country in the world. We bring in 1 million immigrants a year. But there has to be a process. And the left has no argument other than to politicize this, because if you remember last year, and it caused me a lot of consternation, the president offered all those people who were here, the dreamers, if you will,
right,
a path to citizenship,
right,
for funding for the wall.
Right.
And the left said no. It's
right,
the same argument Ronald Reagan made in the 80s when he said, look, give me border security and we'll make all those people that are here illegally American citizens. And the Democrats made them American citizens, and they never did the second part of it. This has been a debate that's been going on for 40 years.
Well, because, Corey, this is the unholy alliance that's playing out right now, that this President Donald J. Trump has exposed Democrats who want open borders because they're looking for cheap votes in perpetuity, and Republican donors that fund Republican open border candidates and congressmen that look the other way because they want cheap labor. And it's been going on. It's been the biggest scam in the U.S. system for 4 decades. This president's the first person to campaign and expose the nonsense for what it is. That's why it's so tough for him to get this done. They were saying yesterday that basically the Democrats kept saying, we'll negotiate, but after you open the government. And the president said his position is, look, and this was the same thing the vice president said, if we do that, it's simply we're going to open it for 30 days and then negotiate on day 29. It's going to be the same thing.
That's exactly right. Look, the argument that these Democrats have is you give us what we want, then we'll negotiate what is left. And that just doesn't make any sense if you're the president or the American people. And look, unfortunately, the Democrats, particularly in these sanctuary states, are allowing illegal aliens more and more rights. They're giving them the rights to drive, some places the rights to vote, right? We've seen this more and more. What they want is they want cheap votes, they want cheap labor, and they don't want this actually solved as a problem. They want to keep it as a political football. And so I stand with the president and the vice president where they say, look, let's sit down at the table. Let's have an honest and open discussion of what's really going to happen. And if I had the privilege to speak to the president on the issue, I would say to him, you need to use every resource available to you as the chief executive of our country, as the commander of our law enforcement officers. You send our military down there and you put the backhoes in the ground, you put the shovels in the ground, you start building the wall, whether that's a concrete wall or it's a steel barrier or whatever it may be, and you have some activist, federal judge come in and you tell them under Article 2, Section 2 of the Constitution you don't have the authority to use the military because it's very clear the president has almost 100% authority other than declaring war, which is up to Congress, to use the military at his discretion. And so, look, let's get some activist judges to do that. Let's litigate this to the Supreme Court. And once that happens, I think the Supreme Court's going to be very clear, as they have been when it came to who can come into this country, and the president can limit who can come in. They've been very clear. The constitutional authority rests with the chief executive of our country, the President of the United States.
Well, the president said that in the briefing yesterday. He said, let's let this thing, he said, I'm going to invoke the military to build the wall if I can't get it through Congress. It's going to be immediately challenged. It'll stay, he said, by the Ninth Circuit, but then it's going to go all the way to the Supreme Court. We're going to fast track it, and we'll go from there. And he says, ultimately, I'm going to be successful. And just what you said, I mean, the Congress can't tell a president whether or not he can commit troops or commit some kind of action across the globe without declaring war. You eventually have to do that, but they can't do it in the short term or you would have a chaotic situation.
Look, there are separate and equal branches, and everybody believes that that is what is necessary. But, the loggerheads that we are now at, which is Congress refuses to negotiate, the president has the authority to use the military almost at his discretion. And I don't see, just to get back to it, how protecting American citizens on the borders is an abuse of power. It is not. It is very clear that he has the authority to. We are doing that now, and the men and women who wear the uniform every day of Customs and Border Protection and INS are saying we need additional help. We need a barrier of some nature. We want to be able to see through that barrier. We want to see what's coming on the other side. And we are asking Congress. We've seen it now from the chiefs of CBP, right? We need assistance. Please give us the tools we need to be successful. Walls work, not 2,000 miles of walls, but more than what we have now. And if those are the people who are protecting us every day, day and night, from the criminals and the illegals coming across the border, why don't we give them the tools that they need to be successful? Nancy Pelosi wants to give $20 billion in foreign aid to countries around the world to help them grow and become better. Why can't we protect ourselves? Why can't we do something for us for a change? And again, I'm not an isolationist, John, but I am an American first. And that means, well, we need to help other countries. One person dying in this country at the hands of an illegal is one too many.
We're with Corey Lewandowski. He's the best-selling New York Times author, Let Trump Be Trump and Trump's Enemies. You can buy these on B. Dalton Bookstore, your favorite bookstore, Amazon. You can go to our website, johnfredericksradio.com. Click on it there. Go right to the link. These are must-reads. Trump's Enemies, now a New York Times bestseller. Corey Lewandowski, the former campaign manager for the Trump for President campaign, now an informal senior advisor to the president. The president saying yesterday in the briefing, he said, look, we got to asylum. And he said 90% of those that claim asylum are not granted it eventually. But he said the problem is as soon as they step foot in the United States illegally, they're protected. And he said they read a script that lawyers gave them in Spanish and English. They read the script. They can only be detained with a child for 20 days. They can't possibly be processed in 20 days. And then they're released, and they have a potential court date to come back in months and months. And he says only 2% come back. So 90% would be rejected, but only 2% come back. And he said, what kind of a system is this?
Well, John, it's clearly a broken system. It's a system that is so fundamentally flawed that people are taking advantage of our generosity, the attorneys. And look, I can only imagine how treacherous of a trek it would be to walk with young children and women through Central America and try and make their way for a better life. But there is a way to do that. And if you actually need asylum, there is a process to do that. You can't, our law does not allow you to walk through multiple countries and then get to the United States and say, hey, by the way, I need political asylum, because you could have claimed that in Mexico if you wanted to. There are ways to do that. But these people want economic asylum. They're not coming for political prosecution because, as the president points out, many of them are carrying their flags of their home countries as they walk through, in this caravan. So, look, we are a great country. We're an amazing nation. But we can't continue to be taken advantage of, and we don't have enough judges on the bench to hear the immigration cases. We don't have enough Border Patrol agents on the border because of the influx of all the people. We don't have a barrier down there that will help prevent a number of these things from happening. And just look at Israel. 99.9% effective, the wall and checkpoints of making sure people aren't coming into Israel. And by the way, Israel's in a bad neighborhood, okay? In case you forgot. They're in a tough neighborhood with a lot of bad hombres around them who want to kill them. And you know what they did? They put a wall up, and guess what? No one's getting in anymore. And those that try and get in that don't, guess what happens? They get shot because those people want to kill Israelis. And so if we have a barrier of some nature, it allows our men and women who are protecting us on that southern border to be safer. We're giving them an extra layer of protection, and that's in addition to the drones and all the other sophisticated surveillance that we need and need to have, but a level of additional security. Look, when I was on the job, when I patrolled and wore my badge, I patrolled alone, because that's how the job was done. And if I need a backup, it could have been as a member of the police office.
New Hampshire State Police.
And when I patrolled alone, I didn't know if my backup was 1 minute away or 20 minutes away. But I wanted every tool available to me that if I got into a situation, I knew that I would be protected. And that meant having the right equipment, having the right radio equipment, everything. The Border Patrol is asking for the right equipment.
Right.
They're asking for it. I don't understand how Democrats are saying, we won't give you what you need if you're going to do the job. Look, anybody who's ever been to Washington, D.C., good luck getting close to the Capitol. Good luck driving your car through all the barriers and the magnetometers when you want to go see Nancy Pelosi, who's now surrounded by armed guards, or for that matter, every other member of Congress who has, magnetometers and armed guards at every door and these big giant barricades. You can't just drive up there. Why are they any different, right? And look, I get it. It's the hypocrisy. All of these guys are do as I say, not as I do, right? We don't need a wall. Walls are terrible. Nancy Pelosi's house in California has a massive wall. We've all seen the pictures, right? Barack Obama's house in Washington, D.C., after he bought it, he put a wall in, and rightfully so. But Secret Service said, it's not secure enough, you need to build a wall, and that's what they did. So why is our country not equal to what those people have? I don't understand it.
Unbelievable. We're going to look forward to the speech tonight. We're out of time. Corey Lewandowski, thanks, Corey, for being with us. Buy his books, Let Trump Be Trump. That's number 1. Trump's Enemies, Both New York Times bestsellers. If you haven't read them, you're really missing out. John Fredericks Radio Network.